Hi there, and welcome to Green Shoe Conversations. I'm Stephanie Cochran, and I'm the Executive Director for the Green Shoe Foundation, and this is episode 18. With me today, I have Mr. Stephen Brinkworth. He is one of our therapists here at Green Shoe. Hey, Steve, how are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Good. And this is happy first Friday in October, too. I cannot believe I'm saying October. But yeah, I've been definitely enjoyed the cooler mornings this week, and hopefully that's kind of a hint of what's to come. But that kind of sparks why we're having our conversation today. October starts Mental Health Awareness Month, if folks didn't know that. And actually, what I want to do today is kind of highlight you. You have been with Green Shoe a little bit over 2 years, but have been in the mental health world a lot longer. And we wanted to kind of spend some time so that way people can kind of get to know you a little bit better, your background, and kind of your role here at Green Shoe. So I know that kind of puts you on the spot for it all to be about you. But for 20 minutes, we can make it be all about ourselves for a minute. We are, as we say, we are worthy. We have the right to make it be about us.
Yes.
With all of that. So why don't you just kind of start us out? That's the biggest question of tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, like you mentioned, I'm one of the therapists here at Green Shoe. I've been here for, I think in January it will be 3 years. So I know on Mondays I keep saying 2.5, but you kind of missed that. It's close to 3, but I've before working at Green Shoe, I worked in inpatient psychiatric hospitals for about 5 years. Also worked in a community mental health center. I grew up in Oklahoma, and for those that are familiar with Oklahoma City, I'm a pirate. I went to Putnam City Original, was the drum major my senior year, and so marching band is something that was a really fond passion of mine, as exhausting and enjoyable as it was at the same time. But after graduating, I moved away to North Carolina and went to an incredible school out in Greensboro, North Carolina, called Guilford College. That's a private liberal arts Quaker college, and really, really had some marvelous relationships that were built out there. Learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about our community. The school is actually older than our state by statehood. So there's a lot of history out there, and it was an amazing place to be. But I've got interests that are all over the place, and you and I have talked about that too. Yeah. So I might let you guide me with some questions a little bit.
Well, and I love hearing your stories about North Carolina, and having grown up in Oklahoma, why North Carolina? How did you find your way to Guilford College? I guess I've always been curious about.
Yeah. Well, when it came time to look at colleges, there was a part of me that knew that if I went west to the Rockies, that I would probably have most of my attention geared towards ski season and not really focused on moving myself forward at all.
So yeah, I can understand that.
I knew that was something I needed to keep as a hobby and a vacation, and not the first place I ventured off to. So I started picking brains of people that we knew, and my mom had a couple of friends whose daughter went to school out in Greensboro at Guilford College, and said, well, you guys ought to check Guilford out and just see what you think. And her parents said she absolutely loved it. And I wanted to get out of the state for a while. I needed some experience with community that was not what I'd grown up in. And so we went and toured the school, and there was a part of that tour that just immediately felt like home. And I knew this is where I belonged, and I had the opportunity to go, and so I did.
Oh, that is neat. Well, so then how did you kind of wind your way into counseling? Okay. I know there's a story there too about how that all kind of came together.
That winding kind of is exactly right, kind of in and out. For a long time growing up, I wanted to be a pathologist. I wanted to have the same career that my dad had. And so as I was in high school, one of my dear friends, Zach Immel, who's now got his doctorate in clinical psych and does a lot of research and works out in Utah. He and I used to talk about being therapists, and that was something that was in common discussion, and it was something we found fascinating. And it kind of fell by the wayside as I was really getting into more of the music and the arts. And so when I went to Guilford, I explored more of the arts and got into ceramics and woodblock printing, and absolutely loved the process involved in creating
Mm-hmm.
images and artwork. And once I finished Guilford, I kind of thought, well, maybe there's something I can do in the arts. And I didn't really find that connection right away.
Mm-hmm.
After I moved back to Oklahoma, I started working in a retirement community over at Epworth Villa, and I was there for about 10 years. I did my first master's while I was working there, but I found a deep passion for working with elders and caregivers and end-of-life issues, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all sorts of pieces that go on with that aging process. And that rekindled that desire to help in a way that looked more like counseling than what I was doing. And so that was part of my first exploration into master's program. And I did a master's in human relations, which is more of an LPC track. And it was an amazing program. And then the stock market crashed in 08. And I would like to have some opportunity to be able to not just do counseling, but to have a broader scope of things I could do,
Mm-hmm.
a wider variety of places I could look for employment, because if the stock market is going to crash, I want to make sure I'm still able to put a roof over my head and food.
Sure.
And so I went back to school for a master's of social work.
Mm-hmm.
That license has reciprocity in about 48 states. And
Yeah.
so I could extend my job search larger. And really, as I worked in that program, they required me to shift away from what had been familiar and get some exposure to working with a different clientele.
Mm-hmm.
And so moving away from grief and end-of-life issues and some of those changes that we see as elders and as caregivers, I moved to that first job I took was with a community mental health center. And so I shifted from a community that had financially some benefits that the folks coming through the community mental health center did not have. And so I saw an extreme shift in terms of need, but also got a lot of exposure to folks that were struggling with symptoms of severe mental illness, some really intense issues. And that planted a seed for working with trauma that I never thought I would have as fond of an attachment to working with, walking alongside people through the healing process of healing from trauma. In the psychiatric hospitals, got a little bit more exposure, found more information, into some interpersonal neurobiology and the neuroscience behind some of the ways that trauma impact our brains, our bodies, and really just wanted more. And I found Green Shoe. And I have a dear friend who's a therapist in the community that recommended that I get in touch with Green Shoe. And so as I did, that started an interview process, and I've fallen in love with the model, what we do. And it's a beautiful, beautiful process that I've heard you say on Monday that it combines a lot of your experiences. This combines a lot of my experiences too, in a way that I get to help walk people through that healing process. And it's really been something that when I go home at night, I know I've made a difference. And that's a key piece of why I got into counseling. I wanted to help.
Yeah. And it's so interesting for me to hear your, like you said, that winding story about how you got there. Because there's things I didn't even know until, you're talking about that. And you're right. And I'm speaking for me, a lot of us go into counseling because we want to help people. And we get something out of that. There's that gratification that we see that. And with you, Steve, when you talk about that finding working with trauma,
Mhm.
it's not just something I watch you enjoy, but it's really something that just emanates from you as a passion,
Mhm.
and the compassion that comes out of you when you're working with people in trauma and this model. You and I got into some great conversation just yesterday as we were kind of
Mhm.
talking about this podcast, just about the model and how it works, and even how it's different from the other types of therapy. And I say types of therapy, but really just the
Mhm.
roles. And obviously going from hospital settings or a nursing care, elder care kind of setting to we work with somebody intensively for 5 days.
Yes.
How, I don't know if it's like, what are your favorite parts or if that's a good way to put it, but just what is different about the model that you just really are finding that that fits for you?
Yeah. One of the things, and this is part of what we talked about yesterday too, um, one of the first things that comes to mind just hearing you chew on that is that in those other settings, so in the community mental health center, there were certain steps and protocols and pieces that had to be done for the business, for the billing end of things. And so sometimes when there are that level of components that we have to check all these boxes, that becomes the focus and not the person that's sitting in front of us. And that really felt discordant with me.
Mhm.
In the hospital setting, similar, there's a lot of boxes we've got to check to make sure that whatever brought you into the hospital, we can help get you stabilized so that you can go home and keep moving forward in your recovery. And so in a hospital setting, what I got to see was stabilization.
Mm.
Get to see that healing process that we see at Green Shoe in 5 days. So even despite the time frame,
Yeah.
it was a different focus, and that focus was on stability and safety. And so as we're in an outpatient setting at Green Shoe and we don't have that same kind of hospital setting, there is a commitment to showing up for ourselves that I see in the folks who come through that have a desire to really dig deep and heal. And it's incredible the amount of healing that can take place in 5 days. And that's immensely rewarding to be able to see not only that healing, but to see that I've been a part of making a difference for somebody, that I've played a role. It's not me that's doing the work, but I've been able to help guide. And that is beautiful.
Mhm.
There's there's some limitations in those other settings, and that doesn't take away from the work that happens in those settings, because there's some
Sure.
really meaningful work that I know I've been able to be a part of, and several others continue to be a part of. But it's a different focus. And so that stabilization that happened in the hospitals didn't give me the opportunity to see what happens next. Once we get to safety, where do we go from there?
Right.
That's something I knew for myself that I needed to be able to be a part of and to see, for me to continue to have that level of health,
Sure.
mental health on my own accord, to
Yeah.
be able to be present to help people.
Yeah. And like you said, the hospital setting and that role it plays for stabilization. I mean, it's so crucial. And we'll
Yes.
get into that in a minute, especially in talking
Yeah.
about, the mental health awareness. I mean, and especially here in Oklahoma, and,
Mm-hmm.
and in this area, it's so vital that role they play. And again,
Absolutely.
what we do is it's a different role. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I've seen you on Fridays
Mm-hmm.
be mentally spent,
Mm-hmm.
physically spent, but then just have this joy coming from you. And so being able to have all of that and the amount that you give of yourself in those 5 days to help others be able to actually heal
Mm-hmm.
and be able to now go into their life, and it just doesn't affect them individually, because obviously it does, but it affects their relationships, either with their friends, their family, their children, their partners. It's
Absolutely.
just, yeah, it's incredible. But I watched the drain,
Mm-hmm.
in you, um,
Yeah.
but then you're so
And that's a
happy about it.
huge piece of, well, that's a huge piece of, talking about
Mhm.
mental health awareness. That's a piece that we've got to be aware of for ourselves too. Even if I was not a therapist, helping people can be a drain because it does wear on us when we're present with any number of intensities that might be present. And so that self-care is absolutely crucial. And that's something that, some days I do better at than others.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's just part of being human.
Right,
So,
exactly. And having been in this field for a while, I mean, for you, and again, for me, and I know with us, mental health awareness is not just the month of October. It's
mhm,
something that, we can get on our soapboxes and preach every single day.
sure.
But while we've got people's attention this month, what are some kind of issues, for you personally that are very important and wanting people to really kind of acknowledge and become aware of?
There's, I think, a lot of pieces, and this model has helped me to see some of this in a different way. Um, but to check in with ourselves. It's so easy for us to get focused on everybody else, but to really check in with ourselves about what's coming up. Because there may be, when the pandemic first started and we all closed down and went into quarantine and, we were shut down for 4 months before we were
Yeah.
able to start doing groups again. That shifted a lot for me, but for a lot of people. One of my favorite ways to recharge my batteries is in nature. And one of the things that I do is play disc golf. And when this first hit, partly to protect the community, they pulled, meaning they removed the disc golf baskets from the courses in the city. So one of the things that I did for decompression and allowing myself to kind of reconnect was gone. So I needed to find some other avenues. And so I think self-care is a huge, huge piece that we need to acknowledge that there are pieces, just like with self-care, where it is absolutely crucial for us to be selfish in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
And because oftentimes we may learn that selfishness is bad, period. But there is selfishness in a good sense and selfishness in a bad sense. And so I think self-care is a huge piece of that. Another thing you and I talked about yesterday were I still have a deep passion for elders and caregivers. And so one of the things that I have still kind of followed quietly have been what's going on in the Alzheimer's community, what's going on in the caregiving community. And there's a term that's discussed that's a group of people who are caring for both their kids and potentially caring for their parents at the same time. And it's called the sandwich generation.
Mm-hmm.
And so having both ends of that caregiving where I'm literally burning the candle at both ends can be absolutely exhausting and feel like I don't have an avenue to stop,
Yeah.
to take care of ourselves. And so I think when we get into those caregiving roles, oftentimes we lose sight of what our own needs are
Oh,
because
yeah.
we help somebody else. So I think those are some pieces that stand out to me that aren't in a grand soapbox scale of me speaking about depression or anxiety, but the importance of self-care and that awareness of what's going on for us to be able to recognize that we can say no and
Yeah.
to take a break.
Yeah.
And that's huge. It's something we all need.
Right. And like you said, and we talk about this with, the model on our core issues, how everything's on a scale, of extremes. But what that means is, think about it with self-care. We talk about being selfish. Yes, you can be way too selfish. But
Mm-hmm.
guess what? In the middle means I get this much to be
Yeah.
selfish,
Yeah.
and we've got to acknowledge that, like my little hands description. But yeah, I get some time that I can say no, or say that I need to take some time for me. And I hadn't thought about this till you kind of said that is, if I'm in that sandwich role, it's not just one caregiving
Mm-mm.
entity, because sometimes the caregiver for my parents is different than the caregiver for my children. And
Yes.
so, yes, all of these roles and hats and some stuff that I've been going through recently, it's really easy for me to lose myself and having to
Sure.
take care of others because I'm so caught up in that.
Sure.
And I can't imagine having to do it on a full-time basis. And
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Making sure that we check in on these people and tell them,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
and they're not going to ask for help.
Mm-mm.
That's, most of the time.
Oftentimes when
Yeah.
we're in that caregiver mentality, I feel like I'm the one that's supposed to be helping, not asking
Yeah.
for.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's absolutely important. So yeah, great topic.
Hmm.
Okay, so instead of us just kind of going through and talking about your favorite hobbies and this or that, which I love you bringing up disc golf because I know how much you love that. The other thing is getting into your creative side
Sure.
too. It's fascinating, and I know through the pandemic you even started to do more pottery and
Hmm.
finding avenues with that. Okay, and a lot of these famous interviews that people do, they do rapid fire questions. And I'm just saying, I have not prepped you on this, and I told you I was going to do it, but you don't know the questions coming. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and you've got to answer it as fast as you can. Just whatever.
I will do my best.
And you can say skip too. If you're absolutely lost on it, you can
Sure.
absolutely skip. Okay. So
Okay.
you ready? I don't
Ready.
have a timer. We're just going to do it.
Sure.
Okay. Favorite city in the U.S. besides the one you live in?
Boulder.
Boulder. Nice.
Boulder, Colorado.
Last song you downloaded?
Oh, I have no idea. I've been streaming so much that I don't download.
Okay.
Um, it would probably be one of two groups, Rising Appalachia or Larkin Poe. Both
Wow.
female groups, and I
Uh-huh.
think they're siblings.
Yeah. Favorite holiday?
Christmas.
Christmas.
Yeah.
Invisibility or super strength?
Um, Invisibility.
Okay. If you could go back to any period in time, where would it be?
Hmm. As a kid, I would have told you Egypt without batting an eye. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I'll
That's
stop there because I'm going to start thinking of too many other places.
right. Well, that's your inner child speaking up. So
Yeah,
perfect. Okay.
yeah.
Speaking of inner child, favorite junk food?
Favorite junk food? Wendy's.
Nice. Favorite cooking tool? I'm saying tool because I know you, whether it's
Favorite
utensil
cooking
or
tool.
cooking. Yeah.
Um, Favorite cooking tool currently would be my sous vide.
Yeah. You talked about that yesterday.
Hmm.
Okay. Cake or pie?
Cake.
I would have said both, but all right. Last one. If Voldemort offered you a hug, would you accept it?
No,
No. Had to tap
I'm
into
not
your
gonna.
Harry
I'm
Potter
not gonna
there.
be another Horcrux.
Yeah. And I actually did have a last kind of not rapid fire, but last question for us to end on, but you kind of talked about it. But coming around to self-care, what are
Yeah.
your personal favorite self-care things that you do?
There's a place. So we've talked about disc golf. There's a park
Mhm.
in Edmond called Mitch Park.
Yeah.
It's absolutely huge. And before I moved to Edmond, I never realized how big that park actually is. And there's a place I'll go stand that's about in the middle of the south end of the park. And I'll listen to the wind and the top of the trees. And in that space, there's enough trees that on a windy day, it almost sounds like you're just beneath the ocean waves. You can hear it move across the entire expanse of land out there, and it really brings a sense of peace. Um, a fire in the backyard, similar. I've got a fire pit that my wife and I will use from time to time, and with these colder days, really looking
Yeah.
forward to using that. Um, there's, I think, an aspect of stillness that is really important for me to have for that self-care, because so many other pieces get my brain going in different directions. So not necessarily reading, watching TV, but to be able to sit in nature is something that really helps me to recharge.
Yeah, connect and stay grounded. I love that. Hey,
Mhm.
thanks for letting me pick your brain and kind of a
Absolutely.
spotlight on you. Again, this month we're going to be talking about mental health and other things that we can do. We're going to have it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be bringing in some friends and guest speakers to kind of talk about that. and again, kind of highlight more of our staff. And that way it gives everybody a good chance to get to know us and what we do and everything. So Steve, thanks for being my first guinea pig on this. I
You
appreciate
bet. Thanks for having me.
All right. Guys, thanks for joining us too. If you would like to get a hold of us, we are at info@greenshoe.org. It's a great way to email us, or check us out on our website, also greenshoe.org. If you'd like more information about the retreats and what we do, all things are there. So we will see you guys next week.